Support for Louisiana, the state we're in, is provided by...
Every day, I go to work for Entergy.
I know customers are counting on me.
So Entergy is investing millions of dollars
to keep the lights on
and installing new technology
to prevent outages before they happen.
Together,
we power life.
Additional support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum located in Jennings City Hall. The museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is an historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, with support from viewers like you.
But I would say in the next 5 years to 10 years and maybe longer, that's going to be a long haul to get in there.
Controversy over carbon capture and storage.
It's normal for the river to kind of peak around the month of May, and then it tends to dip around October.
Shallowing depths in the Mississippi.
It's probably not going to change anything in a practical way.
8 changes to the Constitution up for vote.
Pre-homecoming celebrations ended in panic last night. 9 people were shot at a frat house party.
7 were taken to the hospital, though police don't say if any of them have life-threatening injuries. They're not certain of that. As of Friday morning, it's unclear why the shooting happened or if any arrests have been made.
Moving on to the latest phase of President Joe Biden's student loan forgiveness plan. It's expected to help nearly 43 million people, and he announced the latest news on Monday.
Yeah, here's what you do. You go online to apply for loan forgiveness, and you can sign up for the program on studentaid.gov. Remember, though, you have to have federal student loans to qualify, make at least $20,000 but less than $125,000 a year.
You have until December 23rd to apply.
Carbon capture and storage has become big news of late in Louisiana and around the globe, in fact. It's a way to reduce carbon emissions from our industrial plants and is considered a key to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. I talked with 2 LSU environmental and energy scientists who told me it's really the only hope to reach net zero by 2050.
I think there's a lot of information and maybe misinformation about what it is. So carbon capture is taking CO2, carbon dioxide, from the exhaust of some industrial facility. Here in Louisiana, some of those, like the most important industrial facilities that we have are our fertilizer production, our petrochemical production, things like that. And they produce a lot of CO2. In carbon capture, you capture that CO2 and you inject it underground into usually a sandstone reservoir. Usually those formations would be something like 5,000 feet or more below the surface. So it's a pretty safe process. There are kind of local environmental risks associated with it, like for instance wetland loss or pipeline transportation risks, things like that. But it's pretty safe. And without it, we can't meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement requires us to be carbon neutral by 2050. And there's just no way to do that without carbon capture and storage.
You mentioned wetlands loss.
Yep.
How would that be a problem?
So when they build a pipeline, so imagine you've got a facility, let's say it's an ammonia production facility that releases a lot of CO2, and you want to take that to a place where you can inject it. Maybe that's 10 miles away, maybe that's 15 miles away. But if there's a wetland on that route, you're going to have to put a pipeline through that wetland, and potentially, you would destroy that part of the wetland.
And there's already been enough of that.
There's been a lot of wetland destruction in Louisiana. Yeah.
You're mentioning injecting it into land. What about water?
Yeah. So there's also a lot of interest in injecting underwater. So much like the injection into a land reservoir, injecting into water would go well under the surface of the ocean. So there's a lot of interest in piping it out to the Gulf of Mexico and injecting it into some of those same sorts of sandstone formations.
Carbon capture is one means of essentially addressing this challenge that we have with climate change. It's not the largest potential solution to the problem, but it's one of many. And as I often explain to my students, there is no silver bullet, because if there were, we would have already pulled the trigger on that, right? What makes CCS unique, and I think the reason why this area has become more of a ground zero within the United States for that application, has been that it's probably one of the few ways that we can address our climate change challenge within an industrial framework. It's very easy, for instance, in power generation to substitute a natural gas generator for solar or for wind. What is less easy is going in and substituting a lot of these big combustion processes that we all see up and down the river with electricity and renewable energy. We just don't have that kind of scope in that activity. So if we're going to maintain that industrial activity, what are we going to do to help combat climate change at the same time? We can't maintain the status quo, right? We're going to have to do something. We can't get to renewables or other types of applications, so what's it going to be? And carbon capture is one of those. A lot of people will tell you, well, let's just do solar. Well, that's an option. That might be an option one day, but I can't generate enough electricity to displace 3,000 degree Celsius steam, right?
It's not there today.
It's not there today. I don't know of any electric boiler out there that can do that. Now, we're working on that, and with a lot of technological innovation, I think greater incentives on these things, we'll get there. But I would say in the next 5 years to 10 years and maybe longer, that's going to be a long haul in getting there.
And next week, we're going to hear from the CEO of a water technology company and his approach to carbon capture and storage, which he also says is going to be essential to reach that climate accord standard of net zero.
The Mississippi River is reaching historic lows in other parts of the country, stalling commerce and boat travel. In Louisiana, cities like New Orleans are combating saltwater intrusion. Barry Keim, the state climatologist, explains why water levels are so low and consequences of the shallowing depths.
So all over the country, people have been talking about a drought and how river levels are dropping, and the Mississippi River is one of those that is experiencing lower levels of water. Why is that happening?
Well, there's drought going on all over certainly the western United States, and that drought is gradually creeping eastward, and it's overwhelming the Great Plains. It's affecting Louisiana now. We have some drought in Louisiana at the moment, and it's continuing its march towards the east. New England is having some drought issues as well. So really almost the entire country is having some issues where we're just not getting enough rain right now is the big problem. Now out west, they're looking at a many years to decades long issue, which is some of the problems we're hearing on Lake Mead and things like that. Here, we're looking at stuff that's going on over just the last few months. We haven't had enough rain across the Mississippi River Basin, and as a result, we're seeing record low flows at some locations, like Memphis, for example. And then here in Baton Rouge, we're running, I think the river's about 5.5 feet below where it's supposed to be at this particular date. And it's causing some issues. Navigation is an issue. Down in New Orleans, they're concerned about the saltwater wedge coming up from the Gulf of Mexico up the bottom of the river, which could ultimately affect the drinking water for the city. So it has a whole host of implications. The biggest of which, though, internationally, is the trade on the Mississippi River, all this commerce. There's all sorts of agricultural products that move in and out of here internationally, as well as energy, and there's other things as well. So it's this could ultimately affect the supply chains all across the United States and internationally as well.
I believe some experts are predicting that that's already happening. There have been some holdups. They've started to dredge the water in certain places to make sure that it's actually deep enough for big boats to be able to travel through. But whenever you hear the word drought, it is very scary, and I'm sure a lot of people are really worried about what the long-term impacts are. Are we going to be experiencing this dip in water levels for a long time?
Well, I'd say probably not. I think this is just kind of a flash in the pan. This it's going to take place for the next few weeks, maybe the next few months. Eventually, this is very likely to recover. In fact, by the time we get into the spring, the water levels are generally higher in the spring, and it's going to rebound. So I'm not too concerned about the Mississippi River at this point. We don't have issues like they have out west where they really have a lack of water. We tend to, at least in Louisiana, have an overabundance of water. we're usually trying to get rid of water. So this is not normally one of our problems. Now on the Mississippi River, just so you know, it's normal for the river to kind of peak around the month of May with higher river levels, and then it tends to dip around October. So we're in that normal stage where the river is at a lower point. It's just that it's even lower than it's supposed to be at this juncture, which is causing all these navigation problems. So that's essentially the issue right now.
Well, we're both standing out here shivering because it's pretty cold outside. And like you were saying, a lot of the reason why the water levels are dripping is because of the rain and the lack thereof. But is it going to get worse before it gets better because we're in the fall, winter season right now?
Now, I think the best way to answer that is the river is reasonably responsive to when you get some heavy rainfall. For example, if we put some heavy rainfall across the Midwest, across Kansas and Oklahoma and Missouri, that water would take about 2 weeks to finally get down here and have an effect on the river levels. So if we can just return to some kind of normal semblance of our rainfall climatology, the river will rebound relatively quickly, on the order of weeks to months. So it's not like we're going to be stuck in this pattern because of this. We're not going to be stuck in this for years on end trying to dig our way out, like could happen or is happening out in the western U.S., out on the Colorado River and other places in the western United States. We certainly should be concerned, obviously, but the overall pattern on the Mississippi River has actually been increasing runoff and increasing river levels. And we've had the Bonacary spillway open a couple of times a couple of years ago, and high river levels have been more of our problem than low river levels. But Mother Nature is constantly throwing us some new twists and turns, and this is just the latest. And right now it happens to be drought, but this too shall pass.
Have you ever gone to vote, and when you get to close the curtain and pull the lever, what you see to you looks like it could be Martian? Well, we've got voting coming up very soon, and you're likely going to know the candidates, but would you know the 8 proposed amendments to the state constitution? You're in luck tonight because we've got Cable President Barry Irwin and Louisiana Budget Project Director Jan Moeller here with us. You both were featured on the PAR, Public Affairs Research Council webinar last week. So I wanted to ask you to come in here and explain a little bit about these 8 amendments, proposed amendments. Let's go with number 1. Jan, I'll ask you about this one. Larger stock investments for trust funds.
Well, this is a pretty simple amendment, actually, and I think people can be forgiven for asking why it belongs in the Constitution, but it applies to 7 state trust funds managed by the state treasurer. And some of these, the Millennium Trust Fund is probably the one voters will know the best, which is the tobacco settlement dollars, and it lets them invest up to 65% of that money in the stock market. Right now, it is 35%. The supporters of this say that this is going to produce higher yields over time, so the state will have more money to invest in education and healthcare and some of the things that these trust funds pay for. But of course, the stock market comes with bigger risks. Of course.
Right.
So that's all that amendment
does. That's the other side of that. Okay, well, let's look at amendment number 2. Barry, I'll ask you about this one, and that's increasing property tax exemptions for veterans with disabilities.
Well, we've already got some property tax exemptions for veterans and other groups of people. What this does, though, is enhances those exemptions for property taxes, particularly for totally disabled veterans. It would mean they paid no property taxes on their property, and if you have a different level of disability, if this passes, you would effectively get a larger homestead exemption. Is kind of the way it works, depending on the level of your disability. So basically, for disabled veterans at various levels, it would be a tax break for them on their property taxes.
And what do people say would be the downside of this?
I think the downside usually is the same on all of these types of exemptions, that it lowers or reduces the tax base in the local communities. And it's something too, a lot of times people feel like it makes the local governments more dependent on the state, and so that's kind of the argument. It won't really affect that many people, a huge group.
Okay, number 3, amendment number 3, political activity for civil service workers when family members run for office, Jan.
Well, this basically says that if you are a civil servant, a teacher, a rank and file government employee, maybe a police officer, a firefighter, and you have a direct relative who runs for office, then you can appear in their campaign advertisements and you can go to campaign events with them. Right now, the civil service laws of the state, you get a lot of protections if you're in the civil service, but you're also supposed to stay out of politics, and this just makes an exception for this. For direct relatives. The problem with this amendment is that it's a pretty broad definition of what constitutes immediate family. It's about almost 24 categories of people. And the other thing to keep in mind about this isn't something the civil servants were asking for. This is really the politicians who want their relatives to be able to campaign, go out on the stump with them. And so, again, these civil service protections are here for a reason, but I think I can certainly understand if you're running for the legislature and your wife's a teacher, you might want her in a campaign advertisement. So.
Okay, all right, okay, good. Thank you for that. And amendment number 4, waiving charges for water use if infrastructure is damaged.
This one is another one that kind of came from a constituent type situation. The story was told in the legislature about a guy that had some property and there was water on there. I think it was a bayou, and somebody came through there or whatever and they damaged the water line there, and he got a huge water bill at the end of the month. And he said, well, look, this wasn't my fault. I don't think I should pay. So he went to the water board or whatever it was and found out that the Constitution actually does not allow that type of thing. We have a language that's been in there for a very long time about donating things of value. Water is something of value that local and state governments can't sort of waive fees on and that type of thing. So what this would say is that if somehow pipeline or whatever it is, the water line is damaged on your property that you're responsible for, but it's not your fault, you can go and maybe the water board or whatever it would be can waive the penalties or that high rate. There are some problems with that, I think, because anybody could say that, my pipe's busted, it wasn't my fault, exactly. I don't want to pay my water bill, but that's what that would do.
All right, amendment number 5 would be local authority over property tax rates. Jan.
Well, we probably don't have enough time to fully explain what this does. I would refer you to our website. Yes. This is something that local governments are very supportive of because it gives them a little bit more flexibility after an assessment to decide whether to roll forward property tax millages, essentially whether to raise your property taxes after your property has been reassessed. So it doesn't necessarily raise anybody's taxes. It just gives local governments a little bit more flexibility.
Okay, thank you very much. The next one pertains only to if you live in New Orleans, Orleans Parish in particular. That's number 6. It's property tax assessment increases in Orleans Parish. Barry?
Well, as a lot of people know, property values have gone up exponentially in New Orleans, and so that means higher property tax bills. A couple of years ago, actually, we passed something statewide that limited the amount you had to pay to, if it went up 50% or more, you could pay it off over 4 years. This takes it another step forward and says that in the event that property values go up more than 10%, you can't have a property tax bill go up more than 10%. So it would be 10% for whatever period of time. It applies only to Orleans Parish, but voters statewide have to vote to approve the amendment before the vote in Orleans could go into effect.
Got it. Okay. Amendment number 7 is one that you may definitely have to refer to the website on. Many of them. Limits on involuntary servitude. There's language in this that gets odd.
This is a very well-meaning and probably the most controversial of the amendments. The original intent of the author was to get language on slavery out of the state constitution, to say definitively in our state constitution that we ban slavery and involuntary servitude.
So it was still in the Constitution?
It was still, well, there was a ban on slavery, but it allowed involuntary servitude, and so they wanted to kind of get that language, the involuntary servitude language out. It was changed during the legislative process, so now the author of this amendment says he plans to vote against it. I think the bottom line on this amendment is it's probably not going to change anything in a practical way, but there is real symbolic weight to this, and there are a lot of folks in the civil rights world who say, well, we really support this because we don't want to send the message that Louisiana doesn't want to outlaw slavery. But anyway, this is a very complicated amendment. I suggest people go to the website and read more about this.
All right, let's go to number 8, the last one, property tax assessments for certain people with disabilities. Barry?
Basically, this is another instance where we have a fairly lucrative thing. It's called a special assessment for people over 65 or people with disabilities, where it can basically freeze their property assessment so their property taxes would not go up year after year as properties are reassessed. Caveat is that you can't make more than $100,000 a year in household income. Right now, people with disabilities are required to certify or recertify every year that their income is not above $100,000 so they can qualify for that tax break. This would take that recertification, annual recertification out, would make that unnecessary, and they would just get it automatically.
Guys, thanks so much for being here. Very Cliff Notes version, and much more can be found on each of the websites. Cable, for one thing, that's cable.org, also labudget.org, and parlouisiana.org.
It's no secret that Black Greek organizations are beneficial to college students, but they were also instrumental in building up a community of middle-class African Americans through the Civil Rights Movement. This episode of Crossing Over Black Greek Life explains just how the Divine Nine helped Black communities nationwide.
You know why? Why? 'Cause they can't stop like us.
It's true. These organizations breed greatness. I mean, just look at the legacy.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop.
Yep, that's right. Martin Luther King Jr. was an alpha. But it doesn't just stop there. A lot of his entourage were Black Greeks too. Black sororities also had their hand in shaping the future. These organizations helped shape and build Black society. To figure out how, I reached out to Ryan Harris.
Hey.
Hey.
All right, nice to finally meet you in person.
Yes, looking forward to it.
All right, so where are we at right now?
Right now we're at the Lambda Kappa Kappa Foundation House. It's the home of the Lambda Kappa Kappa chapter of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated.
All right. So what are we gonna see on the inside? Something exciting?
The frat house.
A frat house, okay.
Ryan is the vice president of the Greater Baton Rouge Panhellenic Council, and he's an Omega.
What is this?
Oh, that's our emblem, the emblem of the fraternity.
And then this is y'all
Chapter name. Yeah.
Chapter name.
The Lambda Kappa Kappa is the name of the chapter here in Baton Rouge, and our founding date, December 7th, 1995.
To Ryan, the real value of Black Greek life is the chance to serve and make professional connections.
You've mentioned it over and over again. It's about service and it's about community. How are these organizations helping the community, helping to build up Black people?
We all have some type of form of mentorship, scholarship efforts, NAACP, blood drives, and you name it. We may call it different names, but they're all the same thing.
What about in a professional sense?
It's funny you say that because my employment, I actually did get a little help. I know such and such here. It's just a networking tool. And you would do that for someone that you really called a friend. But we're doing the best we can. If somebody needs a ride to go vote, we have not just voter registration, but we trying to carpool, get people there, just assist people where they fall short.
Wait. I'm going to pause here again. Our expert has some great insight on how Black Greek life helped contribute to the Civil Rights Movement.
The Civil Rights Movement was an important time in the history of Black fraternal organizations, particularly because most of the leaders of the Civil Rights Movement were also members of the Divine Nine organizations. For example, Jesse Jackson could really go to different places and leverage not only his membership in Omega Psi Phi fraternity, but also his relationship with the church. You have someone like Bayard Rustin, who organized the March on Washington, also a member of Omega Psi Phi. So you had many people in these groups that had the connections to their organization and to the church that were able to leverage those opportunities into a meaningful civil rights movement.
So nice to meet you in person. I'm Kara.
Hi, I'm Barbara Carpenter. How are you?
I'm good. All right, so where are we at? I've always passed by this place, but I've never been inside.
This is our headquarters for Zeta Phi Beta here in Baton Rouge.
Wow, Got all the nice, pretty blue, just like your jacket.
Oh, thank you.
Barbara Carpenter remembers when frats were organizing during the Civil Rights Movement. Barbara is a Zeta and a Louisiana state representative. The opportunity to serve for a lifetime is the main reason she joined her sorority. She says that's the major distinction between the Divine Nine and white Greek organizations.
I think the major difference between black Greek organizations compared to the white organizations is that of service. Normally, typically, I shall say, white Greek life is fun when you're in college. It's more social. Black Greek life extends beyond the college years. So once you graduate, with our precepts, for instance, of being service, sisterhood, scholarship, we focus on the service and the sisterhood side of it more than the social side.
Why do you think that is?
There were not many organizations that really they could really belong to and focus to do what needed to be done to help people in community. And so the Black Greeks came into effect.
Some people would say that Black Greek life is really responsible for building up a middle class, especially, around your generation's time when you joined.
Yeah, well, you have to understand in the 60s, that was the height of civil rights activities as well.
I don't remember learning about that in school.
Well, you had to have some people who were brave enough to step out in front and take the lead. And oftentimes those people belonged to sororities and fraternities.
Black Greek life helped members meet the community where they were. If neighborhoods didn't have anyone to explain how to apply for a voter's registration, they organized meetings. If the community was struggling with literacy tests, they set up classes and book drives.
And what about when you were first joining the organization in 1968? What was your sorority doing at the time to help with what was going on in the world?
Most of the focus was on education. Teaching people how to read, which was something that was not very common.
Black Greeks are still focused on professional growth. The Small Business Administration announced a new partnership with the National Panhellenic Council to close the wealth gap through Black entrepreneurship. The goal is to teach financial literacy, where African Americans seem to struggle, which isn't that far off from what these organizations set out to do from the start.
To say that we've been in existence 100+ years says a lot to the success of what Black Greek organizations have. I see it continuing. The only thing is that we have to be sure that we pass on what skills we have, what trainings we have, and what contacts we have to the younger generation so that they too can pick it up and move forward with it. Because that's the only way the Black middle class is going to survive and grow.
And everyone, that's our show for this week. Remember, you can watch anything LPB anytime, wherever you are, with our LPB PBS app.
You can catch LPB news and public affairs shows, as well as other Louisiana programs you've come to enjoy over the years. And please like us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram.
For everyone at Louisiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Andre Morrow.
And I'm Kara St. Cyr.
For next time, that's the state we're in.